My name is Harold Whitmore, and the night my son mocked me in front of 40 guests for driving a broken-down truck was also the night I had exactly $11,000 left in my checking account, because the rest of it was sitting in a hospital's accounts receivable department, paying off a debt that wasn't even mine. The party was for Ryan's promotion, Regional Operations Director, his fourth title in 6 years at the logistics company he'd worked his way up through. Brittany had rented out the back room of a steakhouse off the highway, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list nobody in our family used to be able to pronounce. I'd driven over straight from the shop where I still did occasional consulting work, still wearing my old canvas barn coat because I hadn't had time to change, and I parked my 1998 Ford pickup, the one with 240,000 miles on it, right between a BMW and somebody's brand new Tahoe. I walked in a little late, and Ryan was already at the front of the room with a glass raised mid-toast. He saw me come through the door, and instead of pausing, he grinned at the room and pointed my direction. "And here's my dad, ladies and gentlemen, straight from the junkyard." Laughter rippled through the room. "Dad, seriously, when are you going to let that truck die with dignity? People are going to think the pension didn't work out." More laughter. Somebody's cousin from Brittany's side actually clapped. I stood there in the doorway, in my old coat, 40 people looking at me, and I smiled the way you smile when you've decided a long time ago that correcting the record isn't worth the cost of correcting it. "Runs fine," I said. "Just needs an oil change, same as anybody." "Sure it does, Dad." Ryan was still grinning, enjoying the room's attention in that particular way he'd developed since the promotion started coming. "You know you could actually afford a real vehicle if you wanted one. I don't get it." I felt my nephew Danny's eyes on me from across the room. Danny knew exactly why my truck was 12 years past the trade-in point, and exactly why I still wore a coat with a torn pocket lining, and exactly where roughly $211,000 of my retirement savings had actually gone over the last 3 years. He knew because I'd asked him to keep it quiet, and because that's the kind of man Danny is. He looked at me from across that room, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head, the same signal I'd been giving him for 3 years running. "Not yet. Not like this." I found a seat at the back of the room near the appetizer table, and Brittany's mother, a pleasant enough woman I'd met maybe 4 times, leaned over during the salad course. "Ryan tells us you're on a pretty tight budget these days, Harold. Must be hard, after working so many years." I looked at my plate. "We manage. Well, if you ever need anything," she said, in the particular tone people use when they've already decided the answer is no but want credit for offering, "you let us know." I said thank you, and I meant it as politely as I could manage, and I ate the rest of my dinner mostly in silence while my son gave a toast about hard work and financial discipline to a room full of people who believed, because he'd apparently told them so, that his father hadn't managed either one. I drove home that night in my broken-down truck, past the hospital where Danny's wife Melissa had spent 4 months during her leukemia treatment 2 years earlier. Past the billing office where I'd been making a payment, sometimes 2 every single month since, and I sat in my driveway for a long while before going inside, the same way I sat there the day Ryan first told his friends I must be, in his exact words. Kind of falling apart financially, honestly. It's a little embarrassing. I want to tell you how I got to that driveway, because the story everyone at that steakhouse thought they understood wasn't the real one, not even close. I grew up the younger of 2 brothers in a house in Toledo, where money was always tight and love, at least, wasn't. My brother Walter was 4 years older, and from the time I could walk, he was the one who looked out for me, the one who taught me to ride a bike, the one who stood between me and the neighborhood kids who liked to pick on the smaller Whitmore boy. Walter joined the Army out of high school, and I went into a machinist apprenticeship, and we built lives that ran parallel to each other for the next 40 years, close enough that not a single Thanksgiving passed without both our families at one table. I married Ruth in 1978. She worked as a school nurse for 31 years and had a laugh that could fill a room, and we built a modest life together on Larchmere Street. Nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom bungalow we paid off in 19 years flat, because Ruth believed, the same as I did, that debt was a thing you avoided the way you avoided touching a live wire. We raised Ryan in that house, believing the same values would take root in him. For a long time I thought they had. Walter's son Danny grew up 2 streets over, close enough that he and Ryan were more like brothers than cousins for most of their childhood. Danny was the quieter of the 2 boys, steadier, the kind of kid who fixed his own bike instead of asking for a new one. He became an HVAC technician after high school, married a sweet, sharp-witted woman named Melissa who taught second grade, and the two of them built a small, careful life together, the kind Ruth and I recognized because it looked a lot like our own. Walter died of a heart attack 6 years ago, sudden, no warning, gone before the ambulance even got him to the hospital. I was the one who had to call Danny at work and tell him. I still remember the sound he made on the other end of the line, a sound I hope I never hear another human being make again. The night before Walter's service, I sat with Danny on his back porch, both of us too exhausted to sleep, and he said something I've never forgotten. "Uncle Hal, I don't know how to do any of this without him." I told him he wouldn't have to. I didn't make him a grand promise that night, nothing dramatic, just a quiet understanding between two men who'd both lost the same person. But I meant it the same way Walter would have meant it if the situation were reversed, and Walter would have known that. Ruth passed 3 years after that, cancer that moved faster than any of the doctors expected. And losing her taught me something about grief that I hadn't fully understood before, which is that it doesn't close you off from other people's pain. It opens you up to it in a way that's almost unbearable, because you finally understand exactly how heavy it is. Melissa was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia 18 months after Ruth died. Danny called me the night they got the diagnosis, his voice flat with shock, and I drove over immediately and sat with him in that same kitchen where Walter used to grill on Sundays, and I listened to him explain what the doctors had told them, the treatment protocol, the timeline, the survival statistics he was already reciting like he'd memorized a textbook out of sheer terror. What he didn't mention that night, because he didn't fully understand it himself yet, was what all of that would cost. Melissa's treatment ran nearly 2 years. Induction chemotherapy, a stem cell transplant, an extended hospital stay when she developed a serious infection during recovery, months of follow-up care and medication that insurance covered maybe 60% of on a good month. Danny worked every overtime shift his HVAC company would give him. He sold his truck and bought a used sedan. He and Melissa moved out of their rental into a smaller one. None of it was close to enough. By the time Melissa's treatment ended, in remission, thank God, still in remission today, the family owed a hospital system in Toledo just over $230,000. I found out the actual number by accident, not because Danny told me. He was too proud for that, the same way his father had been too proud to ever accept help he thought he hadn't earned. I found out because I drove him to a billing consultation appointment one afternoon when his car wouldn't start, and I sat in the waiting room, and through a door that wasn't quite shut, I heard a billing coordinator read the balance out loud. I didn't say anything to Danny that day. I went home, and I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and every bank statement I owned, and I did the math on what I had, what Ruth and I had built over 40 years of not buying things we didn't need, and I decided, without asking anyone's permission, what I was going to do with it. The next week, I called the hospital's billing office myself. I didn't tell them I was Danny's uncle at first. I asked what it would take to negotiate a lump sum settlement on an account, and a very patient woman named Carla walked me through the process. Hospitals, it turns out, will often settle medical debt for less than the full billed amount if you can pay a substantial portion up front, sometimes 40-50 cents on the dollar. I negotiated Danny and Melissa's account down to $141,000, paid in a combination of a lump sum and 18 monthly installments, and I told Carla to send all correspondence to my address, not Danny's. I never told Danny what I'd done, not directly. About 4 months later, he mentioned, almost in passing, that the hospital had stopped calling, that a letter had saying the account was resolved through a payment arrangement, and that he couldn't figure out who'd set it up. I told him insurance companies sometimes fix their own mistakes eventually. He believed me, mostly, though I think some part of him suspected the truth and simply didn't want to make me say it out loud, which would have made accepting it feel too much like charity instead of family. It took every dollar Ruth and I had saved beyond our modest pension and Social Security. I stopped trading in vehicles. I stopped replacing things that could be mended instead. I started saying no to small purchases I would have made without a second thought 5 years earlier, not because I was struggling, but because every spare dollar had a destination now, the same way it had when Ryan was young, and every extra dollar went toward his college fund instead of a nicer car for me. What I hadn't anticipated was how that visible frugality would look to my own son, who had built a life, a career, an entire identity around the opposite instinct. Ryan noticed the old truck stayed old. He noticed I stopped mentioning vacations or upgrades, and somewhere in the last 3 years, without ever once asking me directly what was going on, he decided he already knew the answer, and the answer he settled on was that his father was quietly falling apart financially, too proud or too confused to admit it. I let him believe that. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was that the truth belonged to Danny and Melissa more than it belonged to me, and it wasn't mine to hand out as a defense of my own reputation. But part of it, if I'm being fully honest, was that some old wound in me wanted to see what my son would do if he genuinely believed his father needed help. I wanted to know if the instinct to show up would still be there, buried under 20 years of BMWs and steakhouse dinners. I found out at that promotion party, in front of 40 guests, exactly what that instinct had turned into. 3 days after the party, Ryan showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, with Brittany waiting in the car outside. He'd never done that before, just appeared without calling first. And I should have understood immediately that something had shifted. "Dad, we need to talk about your finances." I let him in. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once done the math on Danny's hospital bill, and he pulled out his phone like he'd rehearsed this. "I did some digging," he said. "I'm your beneficiary on the checking account. Remember, from when Mom was sick and you added me for emergencies." I pulled up the statements. "Dad, there's over $200,000 gone out of your accounts over the last 3 years. Wire transfers, cashier's checks, all going to some hospital billing department." My stomach dropped, not from guilt, but from the particular kind of dread you feel when you realize a private thing is about to become a public argument. "You had no right to look at those statements without asking me," I said. "I had every right, Dad. I'm worried about you. Do you understand what this looks like? A hospital. Drawing down your entire savings month after month? Are you sick? Did something happen you're not telling us? Or, God, Dad, is someone taking advantage of you? Some kind of scam? Nobody's taking advantage of me." "Then what is it?" His voice rose. "Because either you're sick and hiding it, or you're being scammed, or you've completely lost your grip on your own finances, and none of those options are okay, Dad. Brittany and I have actually been talking about whether we need to look into some kind of, I don't know, some kind of financial guardianship, just to protect what's left before." Guardianship. I said the word back to him slowly, letting him hear how it sounded out loud. "You want to have your father declared incompetent?" "I don't want to, Dad, but if you can't explain where $200,000 went." "It went to your cousin," I said. Ryan stopped cold. "What?" "It went to Danny, to Melissa's hospital bills. All of it. Every transfer, every cashier's check, every dollar." I looked at him steadily. "Your uncle's son almost lost his wife to leukemia, and the hospital was going to bury that family in debt for the next 20 years. And I had the money sitting in an account doing nothing except making me feel comfortable, so I used it." Ryan sat very still. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell. It was Danny and Melissa's private business, and because, frankly, Ryan, I wasn't sure you'd have understood it the way I needed you to. That's not fair, isn't it?" I kept my voice level, though something in my chest had gone tight and hot. "You stood up in front of 40 people 3 days ago and told a room full of strangers your father's pension didn't work out. You let your mother-in-law offer me charity like I was some old man who couldn't manage a checkbook. How exactly was I supposed to trust you with something this important when you couldn't even extend me the benefit of the doubt over an old truck?" Ryan didn't have an answer for that. Not right away. Brittany, tired of waiting in the car, came in through the front door at that moment, saw the look on both our faces, and said, "What's going on?" "Dad's been paying off Danny's medical debt," Ryan said quietly. "For 3 years, that's where the money went." Brittany's expression flickered, something between surprise and, I noticed, a very quick calculation of what this now meant socially, for her, for the story she'd been telling people at the club. "Well," she finally said, "you could have at least told us. We've been so embarrassed, explaining to people why you—" "Embarrassed," I repeated. "You've been embarrassed. It's not easy, Harold, having people ask why my father-in-law drives what he drives." I stood up from the table. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. "Let me explain something to both of you. I spent 40 years building a life where nobody in my family ever had to worry about money, including the two of you, including every Christmas and every tuition payment and every wedding this family has ever thrown. And in the last 3 years, I quietly spent what was left of that life making sure my brother's son didn't lose his wife to a hospital bill on top of losing her to cancer. I am not embarrassed by a single dollar of it. If anything about this situation is embarrassing, it's the fact that my own son decided the kindest available explanation for his father's frugality was incompetence. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Dad, I think you should both go home," I said. "I need some time." They left. I sat alone in that kitchen for a long while afterward, the same kitchen where I'd once done math with a calculator and a stack of bills. And I thought about Walter and what he would have said if he'd been standing in the doorway, watching his brother and his nephew's cousin come apart over a truth that should have been a source of pride instead of suspicion. Danny came by that evening, having heard secondhand from Melissa, who'd heard from Brittany's sister, who apparently already had the whole story by dinner time. He sat across from me at the same table, looking wrecked in a way I hadn't seen since Walter's funeral. "Uncle Hal, why didn't you let me tell them? Or let me tell someone? You've been letting Ryan think you were falling apart for 3 years. Because it was your family's private business, Danny. Not a story to be handed around for my own defense. But you let him think." Danny stopped, shaking his head. "This isn't right. You shouldn't have had to sit in that restaurant and take that." "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I'd do it again every time if it meant Melissa never has to sit across from a hospital billing office, wondering how she's supposed to survive the bill on top of surviving the disease." Danny's eyes were wet. "I still don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me. You just have to keep doing what you've been doing, showing up for the people you love, the same way your father did his whole life." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's the only payment I ever wanted." "The following week, Diane, no, I need to be careful here. That name belongs to a different story. Let me stay with this one." The following week, Ryan called and asked if he could come by alone, without Brittany. I said yes. He arrived carrying a small toolbox, of all things, and stood on my porch looking younger than I'd seen him look in years. "I came to fix the truck," he said. "Danny told me it's actually been running fine the whole time, that you just haven't wanted to spend money on a new one. I figured the least I could do is change your oil myself instead of mocking you for not doing it." I let him. We spent that Saturday afternoon in my driveway, the two of us bent over the engine of a truck he'd made fun of in front of 40 people 2 weeks earlier, and neither of us said much while we worked, which somehow felt like the most honest conversation we'd had in years. "I've been building this whole identity," Ryan finally said, wiping his hands on a rag, "around the idea that success means never looking like you're struggling. And somewhere along the way, I decided that meant looking down on anyone who did, including you, even when I had no idea what I was actually looking at. You judged the coat instead of the man wearing it," I said. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did. Forgiveness isn't the hard part, Ryan. I've already forgiven you, mostly because you're my son, and that's not something I know how to stop being, no matter what you say at a party. Trust is the harder one. That's going to take longer than an oil change." "I know," he said. "I'm willing to put in the time." Brittany's apology, when it eventually came a few weeks later, was smaller, more careful, the kind of apology that admits the specific thing without quite admitting the pattern underneath it. She told me she was sorry for the comment about the club and for not asking more questions before assuming the worst. She didn't fully reckon, not yet anyway, with the years of comments before that one. I accepted what she offered, because a partial apology honestly given is still worth more than a full one performed for an audience, and because I'd rather build something slow and real than demand something fast and hollow. 6 months later, Danny and Melissa hosted a small cookout in their backyard, the same backyard where Walter used to grill on Sundays. Melissa, in remission, laughing the same way she always had before any of this started, stood at the grill flipping burgers while a handful of us sat around a folding table that had somehow survived 3 generations of Whitmore family gatherings. Ryan showed up early. Again, the same way Emily had at a banquet, in a story that isn't this one but rhymes with it in every way that matters. He pulled his own beat-up folding chair over next to mine instead of one of the nicer patio chairs Danny had bought, and he sat there without saying much, just present, the way a son is supposed to be. I looked around that backyard, at my son learning slowly how to be proud of the right things, at my nephew alive and whole because of a decision nobody but Danny and I had known about for 3 years, at Melissa's laugh filling up the yard the way Ruth's laugh used to fill up our old bungalow, and I understood something I don't think I'd have understood as clearly if that party had never happened at all. Wealth was never the truck, and it was never the coat, and it was certainly never what anybody assumed about either one from the outside. Wealth was $211,000 quietly spent, making sure a young woman got to keep laughing in her own backyard. Everything else was just appearances, and appearances, I've learned, are the cheapest thing a person can buy and the least honest thing they'll ever own. If this story reminded you of someone who's ever been quietly judged for how little they seem to have, when in truth they were giving away more than anyone around them realized, don't let appearances decide what you think you know about a person's life. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more true stories about family, sacrifice, and the quiet ways real love actually shows up.